Facebook. The social media giant has gained around 3% since the sell-off. That puts its gains way behind the likes of Alphabet, Apple, and Amazon, which closed at a record high today. Joining us now to discuss is David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy and author of the book, The Facebook Effect. So, David.
Well, first of all, you have to mention that Facebook's growth prospects remain great, and many people on Wall Street still think it's very attractively valued. However, they are in the midst of a multifaceted crisis, I think, both in communications and in a tremendous failure to understand what their real priorities are going to be going forward. And you could, or I could, enumerate a number of things that are going wrong. Certainly the endless discussions about their role in the political developments of the last few years and the continued distribution of fake news on Facebook, in articles on that every day in every media is a problem. Meanwhile, they're losing younger users, and the publishers are mad at them because of the way they've changed the news feed, and I could go on.
All right, so there are a lot of issues here. What should investors be looking for? What concrete numbers, what concrete words to indicate whether Facebook is a buy or a sell?
Well, you know, they've said they're not going to be willing. They're willing to take a lower profit to solve some of these political problems that they've experienced, but they haven't said by how much. I mean, I don't think they were forced to say how much, but I think now, even that weird thing that happened over the weekend with the tweet from the Vice President Rob Goldman, I think made the sense of urgency greater for anyone who's seriously trying to understand where Facebook's head is at as a company. So they need to say, how much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take to fix these political problems, if they're really fixable, or at least just to show more humility that they don't really know?
How does that happen? That a company with so much scrutiny right now about Russian advertisers and fake news and all that their head of advertising goes off and does this tweet storm that seems to downplay all this, not in line with apparently the message that they want. How does that even happen?
Well, you know what makes it even more weird is that other Facebook executives endorsed his tweets before the company started walking them back. So it almost sounds like there's factionalism inside Facebook between people who say, we've got to really be careful, we got to take this seriously, we have a ton of work to do, and people who say, really, we did nothing wrong, which is more or less Goldman's attitude.
In addition to all of the scandal and politics and just sort of these big metaphysical questions, there's also the issue of usage. And the data for people going to the site or using the app, it's not looking great right now, is it? Well,
it isn't. It's not growing the way it was. Younger people, I just saw a statistic. This will be the first year, 2018, when less than half of Americans 12 to 18 will not be on Facebook. I mean, the number will be below half for the first time of those young people. And you know, one of the things that I think is interesting is that there's a lot of speculation that Snap and Twitter's recent success selling ads may be something of a reaction against Facebook targeted ads, because in fact you can't target as well on Twitter or Snap, and some advertisers may be getting spooked about the whole environment there. We don't know yet.
I just want to sort of bring people up to date who weren't following what Rob Goldman said. He basically was saying that the majority of Russian ad spending happened after the election, and that isn't as widely published. He said that yes, people are divided, but it wasn't necessarily before the election. Just to sort of go in and
interestingly, that statement directly contradicted the indictment that Mueller put out to the Russians on Friday, so that was one of the clumsy things about him saying that.
But it's kind of missing the point as well, that we need to tackle this more deeply and understand, particularly ahead of the midterms, which is, I think, one of the big fear factors here. But if we separate out concerns about greater or lesser engagement as far as Facebook is concerned, what that will ultimately mean for advertisers and how they choose to react, versus the concerns about interference in elections or the type of engagement that they're getting and the concerns about the discourse perhaps that spreads. Facebook isn't alone in that, and I do think we should pull this out. We're fixating on Facebook here, but there's other concerns, whether it's YouTube and what they've presented relative to what other advertisers are producing, Twitter, of course, and the bots reacting there as well. Why is Facebook being penalized in the market today versus others?
Because they're the biggest platform, and because Specifically, the Mueller indictment said that Facebook was the primary tool used by the Russians, so I think there are good reasons. On the other hand, it's extremely confusing to understand what's really going on, particularly for the general public. The way these bots work and these Russian actors, they're intentionally confusing us, and to understand and deconstruct what's really happening is hard, even for Facebook. But again, I would use the word humility again to say the attitude I think Facebook needs to take more publicly in regard to all these issues. They have not spoken out publicly enough. Zuckerberg has never in the last year and a half taken unscripted questions from a journalist about these issues in public. He needs to do that.
And it's tough to contain as well, because it's about sowing discourse, it seems, rather than just perhaps in one direction or the other, which was a New York Times article that pulled that out over the weekend as well.
Well, that's exactly the issue we're seeing today. Of course, today, Julia mentioned it's not just Facebook that's having these issues. In the last couple of days, hoax videos showing up on YouTube regarding the students at Parkland High School. They had a fire that they had to put out because that video got promoted to a trending section. Is it possible that these big platforms just will never be able to find a way to actually police their own content, and that it's not going to work, that it's going to be a game of whack-a-mole? Whatever they do, the bad actors will find a way to exploit them?
It's way too early to say they won't be able to solve it. I think it's quite possible they can solve it, but it's probably a long-term process. I mean, let's remember, we've only really been aware of this problem for 6 to 9 months. And these are massive systems that are really complicated. I do think fixes can be found, but I don't think they're going to be easy. And they may involve fewer page views and fewer ads being shown and possibly lower revenues, and that's the complication.
Do they involve regulators finally stepping in?
I believe they should, personally.
Should or will?
Both. Certainly in Europe, they're going to.
Yes.
Well, I have to wonder, is there a way to parse out the political risk here from actual disappointing numbers? I mean, if we look at the underperformance, what's what here?
I think Facebook's underperformance, so to speak, is really not that massive so far. I think, what worries people more is the redesigned news feed, taking, publisher content and commercial content pages, broadcasting into the newsfeed, reducing that dramatically and making it more of a personal medium where we talk about our personal lives with our friends. That's the change they've said they want, but nobody really knows how that's going to affect traffic and what Julie was talking about before, just how much we actually see, how much time we spend there. So these are just, it's terra incognita. It's early days. They've said they're going to do these things. A lot of these changes haven't even been implemented yet, but they are under a microscope because certainly they're in the thick of the most complicated story of our time, which is Russian interference in American democracy.